We're delighted you all are here tonight. We are grateful for having this evening together, sponsored by the Duke Center for Human Rights here at Duke. Emily Stewart and Max Simoleski have done a fantastic job preparing us for this. We also have a series of additional sponsors for the evening. They include the beloved Community Center, Duke Honor Council, the North Carolina NAACP, North Carolina Conference of the AAUP, and the UNC-Chapel Hill chapter of the AAUP. Important to recognize that. We are here tonight in a moment of great importance, both for Duke and for our nation. 50 years ago, last spring, more than 1,500 Duke students, 1,500, occupied the quad outside Duke's chapel after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They demanded that the black workers at Duke be paid a minimum wage, that the university recognize the labor union they were seeking to organize, and that the president of Duke resign from the segregated country club to which he belonged. The next year, more than 50 black students occupied Allen Building before they were routed by police and National Guardsmen. Their demand was that the university create a Black Studies program and hire more African American faculty. Both demands were essential to be met if Duke were to become the kind of inclusive campus able to compete with and become one of America's top universities. Much has changed since then. In 1968, black students constituted less than 1% of the undergraduate population. Today, that figure is 13%. When Nan Cohane was president, and I was dean of the faculty from 1995 to 2004, we increased the number of undergraduate students who were non-white from 15% to 35%. Today, that number is 53%. During that same time period, we grew the number of black faculty by 133%, with black faculty hired in more than 1/3 of all arts and sciences departments. But in some senses, the more things have changed, the more they have remained the same. All first-year students now live on East Campus. They live in the same residence halls with randomly chosen roommates. They eat in the same dining room. They converse with each other. But then they move to West Campus. Racial and ethnic divisions return. They do not live together any longer. There's far less interaction between different ethnic and racial groups. When protesting students occupied Allen Building in 2016, 3 years ago, they released a set of demands. You'd be surprised to know perhaps that those demands were almost identical to those that had been issued half a century ago by students at the Duke Vigil. From one perspective, we feel a huge distance from where we were. From another, we've hardly moved at all. The same is true, of course, of our nation as a whole. Indeed, if anything, income inequality has increased dramatically while our politics remains polarized. So that's the context for our discussion this evening. In an academic world where money shapes programs and donors are fervently cultivated, it is ever more important to examine the impact of seeking endowment and outside financial support. There has been considerable discussion recently about the Koch Foundation and its impact on the schools it has supported, with particular emphasis on the experiences of George Mason University in Virginia, Florida Atlantic University, and Wake Forest University. The Koch Foundation has also funded programs at Duke on political economy and at UNC. So our panel is here tonight to discuss the foundation and their perception of what impact it has and it may have on our colleges and universities at this critical juncture. Our first speaker is Tomas Lopez. He's a 2066. Oh my God! Oh, he wishes. He wishes. He's a 2006 graduate of Duke University and a 2010 graduate of Yale Law School. He worked as an immigration lawyer with the Southern Poverty Law Center in Alabama, and more recently with the Brennan Center's Democracy Program, focusing on voting rights. In 2017, Lopez was appointed Executive Director of Democracy in North Carolina, one of the most well-respected voting organizations in our country. Our second speaker is Rebecca Barber. She earned her bachelor's degree from North Carolina Central University, majoring in English and history. A student activist, she organized her fellow students around issues of voting rights, a $15 minimum wage, and Medicare expansion. She is currently a writer and researcher at the Institute for Southern Studies, a future graduate student in public policy, and we're delighted that she's here at the Stanford School tonight. She is currently deeply involved in today's civil rights movement in North Carolina. Our third speaker is Kate Douglas Torrey. She's a graduate of Stanford with a master's degree in history from the University of Chicago. She became director of the University of North Carolina Press in 1989 and served there for 23 years. I had the privilege of working with her. She's a great, great editor. She was named one of the top 50 women in book publishing and served as president of the Association of American University Presses. A longtime advocate for gender equity, she currently serves as board chair of Planned Parenthood Vote South Atlantic, an organization that supports the right of everyone to have access to equal and quality health care. Our final speaker is Steve Boyd. He teaches courses on the history of Christianity and Christian thought, on gender studies, and religion and public life at Wake Forest University. He holds a distinguished chair and professorship at Wake Forest, and he's one of the most notable faculty members. He's won prizes for excellence in teaching and for community service. He's the author of multiple books and has chaired and co-chaired groups on community empowerment and men's studies. He was among the faculty leaders who looked deeply into the impact of the Koch Foundation's investment at Wake Forest University, which we will talk about tonight. Each of our speakers will talk for about 7 minutes, and we will then have an open discussion about where we are and where we need to go. Thank you very much.
Oh, if you're gonna go from here. All right. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you, Bill, for that introduction. I should share that I spent a lot of time in this building as an undergraduate here, but I actually was a history major, and I'm grateful to the history professors and students in the room for their role in getting me back here. And again, thank you all of you for being here tonight. I'm with Democracy North Carolina, and that is, we are a nonpartisan organization, not affiliated with any political party or any candidate. And what we work to do is to build a more just and equitable North Carolina by protecting the right to vote, taking big money out of politics, and ensuring that we have fair representation in our state. And we do that through grassroots organizing, through policy research, and by leveraging those things to advocate for change at the state level. And the basic idea is that we want to bring people into the political process, especially those who have been historically removed from that or excluded from that, and make that participation meaningful. And so we apply all those tools to doing so. With the few minutes I have right now, what I want to do is explain, first to frame again, the question before us is, what is the impact that the Koch network, and I would even broaden that to sort of big money, has had on the state of North Carolina, and not just on the substance of our politics, but the way in which we conduct those politics. One of the things that I observed when I was an attorney at the Brennan Center working on voting rights cases around the country was that when folks who work on representation issues nationally look at where the issues are, where the challenges is, they say North Carolina is one of these places that is ground zero. This is where the action is. And the reason North Carolina is where the action is because we have the most distorted maps. We have the farthest reaching voting restrictions in the country, and we continue to have some of the most impactful, in ways that are harmful, effects of big money in our politics. So what does that mean? So one of the things that the Koch network has been really effective in doing is helping to empower those that, for particular political aims, aim to change the way in which the rules of our political system affect participation and the effect of participation. What that, in practice, what I would point to, there are lots of things that you can point to here. Ever since the country was founded, some form of rule manipulation has been built into our politics. The term gerrymandering goes back to the early 19th century. Many of the rules that we point to now as the peak of Jim Crow in terms of restricting voting access, again, were politically motivated, expressly to keep Black Americans from holding and exercising power. What we saw in the middle 20th century with the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the barring of poll taxes in the United States Constitution, these were all things that countered a century and a half, almost 2 centuries of voter suppression that were built into our practices and in fact into our statutes and our Constitution. What we see now in the 2010s is a revival of old tricks. And the genesis of all of this, or the event that really made a lot of people realize the power that election rules could have on election outcomes and in turn policy outcomes, was the 2000 election, when that vote went to a recount. And there were all of these, there was partisan wrangling on all sides about how do you count votes, what does the ballot look like. Nobody knew what a state secretary of state was in 2000. And today, you have both major parties investing millions of dollars into Secretary of State races because the people who run elections can sometimes at least be perceived to play a really influential role in what they mean. In North Carolina, what we have had is a really deliberate application of a national plan done here. So in 2010, there was an effort on the part of the Republican Party nationally to take back state legislatures, just like any party would do. They would say, look, we need to win again, we're going to do this, but the intentionality that was put forward was the idea, once we came into power, they said, we're going to implement a plan called Red Map, the Redistricting Majority Project. And so the idea was to take not just gerrymander districts to favor one party or another, but to leverage technology so effectively that these gerrymanders effectively become more permanent, more lasting, more effective than they'd ever been before. Many state legislatures flipped. State legislatures often flip. They will, you see waves after big elections. There was a wave that went in 2018 away from the incumbent president. That's not an uncommon thing. What happened, the most telling thing is what happened after the wave. And there have been over 20 states that since 2010 have passed some kind of law that has made voting more difficult in one way or another. And the reason why North Carolina is at the center of all of this is because our maps have been held to be unlawful racial gerrymanders. So that means they drew the maps in such a way to disadvantage Black and other voters of color. They have also been held, and this will be argued in the Supreme Court next month, to be unlawful political gerrymanders or partisan gerrymanders. And what that means is that they have been drawn in such a way to advantage one political party over another. And so in the words of the legislator who was in charge of leading that process, he said, I drew the maps to favor 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats because I couldn't draw them to favor 11 and 2. And that evidence is on the record. Many of you are familiar with what we in the field call the monster voting law that had one of the nation's strictest voter ID requirements, had the elimination of same-day registration during our early voting period, the elimination of pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, and that was thrown out in court in 2016 for, as I'm sure people in the room are familiar with, acting with almost surgical precision to alienate people from the political process. The upshot of all of this is that democracy is effectively a deal. And the deal is that if you take part, if you choose to vote, if you choose to take part in civic associations, you choose to organize people, and you choose to actually spend your time engaging your community, in return, you get some responsiveness from the people that you are voting for or against. What gerrymandering and the other forms of voter suppression that we've seen in North Carolina do is they break that deal because they remove the incentives. And when we encounter people all the time who say, why should I vote? I know who's going to win my election anyway. Or they say, the people in power don't actually care. These are not necessarily new sentiments, right? People never like politicians. But what's different about what's happening now is that the structures are being altered in such a way that the block on participation is becoming more durable and becoming more permanent. The question is, well, people say, well, you're going to get to redraw the maps in 2021. That's true. But we also have been litigating the 2011 maps since 2011. And so the 2020 election, as of now, is going to be held on maps that look a lot like those 2011 ones. Even though we know, and we have, you can point to the data, you can point also to the rulings of courts that these have been enacted with a specific intent, not to ensure popular representation, whatever political outcome that leads to, but to ensure a very specific outcome. And that has been applied really deliberately, and that has been something that, again, big money, in particular, Koch money has been important nationally. I would say in North Carolina, the Pope Network money has been particularly important for that. And that leads in turn to the policy outcomes that all of us are going to discuss tonight. But at a fundamental level, the process has been broken, and broken quite intentionally.
I think I use the podium.
Sure.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It has been 10 years since the 2009 Koch-influenced Wake County School Board election. For most, it was the first time we had seen the influence on the ultra-rich, ultra-conservative Koch brothers in North Carolina. More personally for me, it was the first time I witnessed my father, Reverend William Barber, then president of the North Carolina NAACP, being arrested in an act of civil disobedience. I was 15 at the time, a public school student in Goldsboro, Wayne County, which has been a site of some of the worst resegregation in the state. And in my own class, I was discovering Henry David Thoreau for the first time and coming to terms with the fact that sometimes civil disobedience is a necessary act. As many of you know, this year also marks 65 years since the Brown versus Board of Education decision determined that segregation is inherently unequal. In 1976, integration into Wayne County meant that the increasingly black city district would be merged with the mostly white county one. Court rulings forbid the county from implementing a diverse plan based on race, so in 2000, it created a plan based on class. Under the program, no more than 40% of any school students could receive subsidized lunches. Their goal was to avoid problems related to concentrated poverty. The county implemented a busing program and also created magnet schools in the inner city to attract suburban students. Under this program, 1/3 of the county schools became public magnet schools. The school system showed that the diverse schools greatly benefited poor students while not harming more privileged students at all. Wake County was lauded as one of the best school systems in the nation. Over nearly a decade, student test scores rose as the economy boomed. Between 1997 and 2007, in fact, Wake County doubled the percentage of black students performing above grade level. This was not achieved at the expense of middle-class students. Their scores also rose. But as we know, the Koch brothers are opponents of public schools. In 2009, by way of the group they founded and fund, Americans for Prosperity, the brothers helped fuel a campaign to elect 4 conservative candidates to the Wake County School Board. The Koch brothers did not put money directly into the election, but Americans for Prosperity put hundreds of thousands of dollars into Wake Cares, a grassroots group that endorsed and organized on behalf of the 4 candidates. Additionally, our Pope gave the second largest individual donation when he fueled $15,000 into the Wake County GOP, most of which was funneled into the school board election. Has anyone in here seen the documentary Koch Brothers Exposed? Okay, yeah. So in the documentary, someone made an analogy. They compared the Koch brothers to the Oz in The Wizard of Oz, who was pulling levers and making things happen behind the scenes. So basically, the candidates, they were pushing one major talking point during their campaign: neighborhood schools. That's a code word, because under the diversity plan, 86% of students already attended schools less than 5 minutes from their home, and 90% attended schools less than 10 minutes from their home. What the conservative candidates really wanted, what the Koch brothers really wanted, was segregated schools. Naturally, with so much money pumped into schools, into such a small campaign, all 4 candidates won. Almost immediately, the newly elected school board members unseated the chair of the school board and revealed plans to do away with the diversity policy. They also revealed that they had absolutely no plan in place that would replace the diversity plan. But they also quickly faced backlash from the North Carolina NAACP, concerned students and parents and community members who knew what ending the diversity policy would mean: resegregated schools. I'm sorry. On one instance, my father was arrested while engaging in a sit-in with 3 other activists: Dr. Timothy B. Tyson, Mary D. Williams, and Nancy Petty. I actually remember watching this on the news, and what I remember the most was the fact that they literally, when the school board members left the room, they literally sat in their seats, which was symbolic in saying that, you're supposed to be representing the people. That's what you're, if you're not going to do it, we're going to speak up for the people. So yeah, they were arrested because they knew that the battle was much bigger than Wake County. If the Wake County school was able to be resegregated, it would send ripples across the nation. In another action, nearly 20 people were arrested while interrupting a school board meeting, and amid the chaos, a black school board member, Keith Sutton, was almost arrested himself. In protest, the NAACP and other community leaders initiated a 2-pronged strategy. There were people protesting in the streets, they were interrupting school board meetings, and they were submitting themselves to be arrested in nonviolent civil disobedience. But there were also legal challenges. Really, it was a 3-pronged strategy because the third strategy was intense voter engagement ahead of the 2011 election. But I'll get to that later. In addition to filing a complaint with the Wake County Schools Accreditor, the Southern Accreditor for Colleges and Schools, the NAACP also filed a 75-page Title VI complaint. After the North Carolina NAACP filed the complaint, one of the conservative school board members broke away from her conservative policies and admitted that the school assignment plan would lead to resegregation. The plan to end the diversity program was halted, and in 2011, there was unprecedented turnout for the local school board election. 21% of the county's electorate compared to 11% in 2009. 5 of the 9 board seats were up for election, and all 5 of the conservative candidates who were running on the neighborhood schools lost their bid. Yeah, 2 minutes, okay. The newly elected school board re-implemented a policy of trying to limit the number of low-income students at schools, but the county buses far less students for diversity than it did a decade ago, and there is a higher percentage of high-poverty schools. Additionally, there is still ongoing work that needs to be done because there are those who wish to break away the county system, even though they know that it would quicken resegregation. There are those who still do not understand the importance of public education and diversity in education. As the struggle continues, I am reminded of the words my dad spoke in a speech back in 2010 that I came across as I was preparing for tonight. Remembering again that this year marks 65 years since Brown versus Board of Education. My dad said, I was a child of Brown. My parents were recruited by NAACP leaders to help desegregate a rural school system in the Black Belt of North Carolina. My children, Sherelle, William, Rebecca, Ben, and Andrew, are the grandchildren of Brown. My children, who I love so much, and their friends, must pick up the struggle in this complicated riddle of race and class that faces us.
Since 2011 and the NCGOP takeover of the General Assembly, we advocates for women's health have had our hands full as attack after attack after attack has become part of the legislative landscape on a regular basis. For almost 10 years, North Carolina has been one of the country's leaders in the race to the bottom when it comes to medically unnecessary restrictions and attempts to shame women for deeply personal decisions about whether to end a pregnancy. The race is real, and nationally there have been more than 424 anti-abortion bills passed in the country just since 2010. I'm going to pause here and just give you 3 quick sources in case you want to do some more research. You've got a fact sheet on the table from the Guttmacher Institute. It's not completely current, and I think it's presented in a dry way, but Guttmacher is a respected surveyor of reproductive health issues. The Kaiser Family Foundation, that's with a .org, is a great website. You can look up all kinds of things in national and state-specific data. Then I recommend an online newsletter called rewire.news. You can subscribe to it. It's free. It's online only. And they do wonderful reporting on a 5-day-a-week basis all across the country. And they have terrific writers and a real robust repository of alarming news from all of our states. Then the final thing I just want to mention briefly is a weekly newsletter that you can subscribe to for free from Planned Parenthood. You can sign up for it on the Planned Parenthood Votes South Atlantic site, where you can also track bills that we're watching in the General Assembly. The newsletter is called Inside Your Legislative Body, and we're in week 2 at the moment. The General Assembly is back in session. Okay, so I'm just going to jump right into the last decade in terms of the erosion of reproductive rights in our state. Governor Perdue was elected in 2008. 2 years later, redistricting and the NC-GOP takeover in the election of 2010, as Tomas and others have explained. From then on, all of Perdue's vetoes of anti-women's health bills were overridden. So starting right away in 2011, the General Assembly tried to defund Planned Parenthood by disqualifying them from receipt through the state of Medicaid reimbursement funds, because Planned Parenthood is also an abortion provider. Title X is the federal government's family planning mechanism for low-income women to receive contraception and family planning help. If all this sounds familiar, it's because it's the exact same thing that's playing out now on the national stage with the Trump administration's announcement last week of their Title X rules, which zero out any reimbursement to Planned Parenthood for Title X. I could do with the next half hour on Title X, but I'm not going to, Bill, I promise you. Planned Parenthood went to court in North Carolina in 2011, and we won, but the writing was clearly on the wall. That same session, there were bills introduced to remove from teachers and state employees' insurance plans, as well as the city and county employees' insurance plans, any abortion coverage. There was a bill requiring not just parental consent, which had been in place for a long time, but notarized parental consent for a minor to receive an abortion. Do you know what it's like to find a notary? 2011 was when the Choose Life license plates were first introduced, with money going to the crisis pregnancy centers, the additional funds generated by those plates going to the crisis pregnancy centers. That was litigated through the Fourth Circuit up to the Supreme Court, returned to the Fourth Circuit. where the ruling was reversed finally in 2016, and those license plates were declared constitutional. These Choose Life license plates and other politically motivated license plates, pro-Confederacy license plates, have proliferated all across the country. And they're being litigated, but because North Carolina's litigation went all the way to the Supreme Court and was returned to the Fourth Circuit on the grounds that a state could express speech, and that was okay. I think that the die is already cast for the constitutionality of those. Now, I'm going to skip ahead. I could tell you year by year what has happened, but it is not going to fit into Bill's time frame. So let me just say that there are underway in the General Assembly right now, and I think this is part of the push emboldened by the confirmation of Justice Kavanaugh and the outcome of the 2018 elections, an increased fervor and a renewed sense of purpose among the anti-abortion politicians all across the country, and that's certainly true in North Carolina. Since 2 weeks ago, 5 bills have been introduced that continue these dangerous trends. There are 2 versions of a bill that purport to provide medically accurate information that a medication abortion, which is the common first trimester abortion, 2 pills in sequence, can be reversed after a woman takes the first pill. This is completely unfounded and unsupported by any medical advice. It's now, it's been in a number of bills since about 2012, and it's back again. There isn't any other medical procedure that has attracted as much mandatory counseling as abortion. Gloria Stein once said, if men could become pregnant, abortion would be unquestioned. A sacrament, I think. Yeah, abortion would be a sacrament. Okay, the other bills that are on the floor right now, there's a method ban bill that outlaws the safest and most common surgical procedure that's done in the second trimester. This has made an appearance in a lot of states. I think it's in North Carolina even a stronger bill than in some other areas because there are pretty severe penalties for the doctors who might ignore that ban. There's a ban on abortion after 13 weeks. Currently it was 20 weeks. That would be the single shortest time frame in the country that isn't being litigated. There are TRAP regulations, fetal personhood regulations, and a number of other things. So I'm sorry I couldn't tell you all the gory details of bills that have been passed, but believe me, there are many, and our opponents are hard at work. I'm sorry.
No, I'll come up there. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm going to need to stand up. Can you hear me okay? Or do I need to hold? Okay. So, okay, let's go. Okay, so I need to stand up because I get pretty agitated about this. I'm Steve Boyd at Wake Forest University. I'm teaching the Department for the Study of Religions. And I guess I'm going to start by saying in 2016, August, there was an announcement in the Winston-Salem Journal that said the Charles G. Koch Foundation had given Wake Forest a gift of $3.69 million for something called the eudaimonia. That's how you say it in Greek. It's eudaimonia. It's easier to say that way. Institute at Wake Forest. That's the first most of my colleagues on campus had ever heard that there was such a gift and that there was such an institute. So everything I'm going to say to you tonight, I've learned since August of 2016. I had no idea what the Kochs were doing and what their agenda was. I had, a little bit. But anyway, so here's what we know. They have an integrated strategy. It's electoral, it's legislative, ALEC, electoral, legislative, and educational. And what they want to do is leverage universities to create a message based on the reputation of the universities that is a friendly message. One of the vice presidents, I think his name is Paul Hardin, said in a 2014 donor summit that Gene Mayer reported on in the New Yorker magazine, is that there are a third of the electorate who are with us. That is, they're libertarians or conservatives, and they're with us. There's a third of the electorate who are collectivists. I would assume many of those are in this room. But they're who are collectivists. They're never going to be with us. But there's a third of the electorate that we can persuade if we can persuade them that we're friendly and that we're going to help them. So they developed this rhetorical strategy that free economy minus regulations is good for human well-being. And so that was their plan. That's a rhetorical plan. And they laid this out in this 2014 donor summit. I was just going to read you some quotes here. Well, anyway, I won't do that. So, anyway, that's the strategy. And so what happened was they want to fund institutes or centers on campuses that essentially pump out this message that unregulated, market-based economies are good for everyone. It encourages human flourishing. Jay Shalin, in his article, Renewal in the University, said, one method donors employ is to beat the power grab by faculty. They understand faculty as power hungry on campuses, is to avoid spelling out any perspective of course content in terms of donation, but to work through a specific professor whose views match the donors. What happened, and I want to introduce Sam Parsons with Uncoat My Campus. We've learned a lot from Sam and the folks at Uncoat My Campus, and I encourage you to go on the website and make a persistent donation to Uncoat My Campus. Anyway, so what they learned at Florida State was that you can't put your own board members on faculty search committees. When people find out that you're doing that, they don't trust you anymore, and they don't trust the university anymore. So they've revised their strategy, and so this is like Koch 3.0 now, and that is they'll send a professor into university with whom they agree, and they'll name him the director of the center or the institute, because they know that they will get what they want under the direction of this particular person. And so the particular person who came to Wake Forest, his name is James Otteson. And, Professor Otteson, in my view, I'm a faculty member, he's a faculty member, is free to believe what he believes. And he's free to write what he writes. He's free to come to whatever conclusions he wants to come to. But what we found out was that he had been a Charles Koch Fellow from 2009 at the American Studies Institute. He had been affiliated with 4 or 5 Koch-funded institutes across the country, including the Heartland Institute, which is at the head of climate change denial. Anyway, he came in 2013, and we received the $3.69 million, and off and running was the Eudaimonia Institute. What happened was the faculty woke up, started reading, and found out what the strategy was, And the intent of the Koch Foundation to use Wake Forest as a lever, I've learned a lot about economics since 2016, and this is what business folks call externalities. An externality is that you offload costs to public, like transportation, fire and police protection, etc., and you don't count that cost in your bottom line in your budget. And so, in a way, what I see the Kochs doing or trying to do in higher education is offload the expense of producing academic studies onto universities and colleges who have, budgets and buildings and classes, etc. So, higher education is an externality, I think, for the Kochs. Anyway, so let me just rush on. And so what happened was we woke up. I'm wearing my AAUP pin tonight because our chapter had become dormant for the last 4 or 5 years. When this happened, we woke up. And now we have about 70 people in the chapter. We have about 20 national members. And we're up and rolling. And so that's a silver lining is you get the accountability from your administration and from your trustees, and from your donors, you get the responsibility from those three bodies if you demand it. And so one of the stories I want to tell tonight is that the faculty are critical in protecting the academic freedom and responsibility in the academy. It is our job to do that. Sometimes administrators aren't incentivized to protect academic freedom and responsibility. It's just the way it is. But they're not incentivized to do that. And so, let me see. What else do I want to say to you? What we found was we had a hard time getting the agreement public. So there is secrecy. It's like the wizard behind the curtain.
Yeah.
So we called several times. We had a petition of 191 faculty asking several things, one of which was to reveal the agreement with the Koch Foundation. We only got it 2 years later. We just got it in this fall. And we also had two Senate committees. The petition asked the Senate to appoint an ad hoc committee and the Committee on Academic Freedom and Responsibility to look into the foundation, look into the gift, etc. And what has come of that is that we needed to revise our gift acceptance policy. We discovered our gift acceptance policy was developed in 2013 with no faculty input. None. The administration created a gift acceptance policy. And that doesn't work because some administrators, particularly if their bonuses are dependent upon fundraising, have what AAUP calls an institutional conflict of interest. They may want to take money because they're incentivized to take money, but not always careful about academic responsibility. The other thing we wanted was that the Koch name should be on the website of the Eudaimonia Institute. It took a year. And finally, when they did it, it was like 4 rows deep on donors, and they were listed with individuals who may have given $25. These people gave $3.69 million.
Right.
We're still struggling to get appropriate disclosure, and this is why it's important. And many of our faculty, and I think some of our administrators didn't understand this. If I get a grant from the Eudaimonia Institute and I use that grant to do research and go to a conference, I need to be able to tell the conference organizer and the editor of wherever I want to send my article who funded me. That's academic responsibility. If that's not on the website, I don't have to report it as a faculty member, and whoever's organizing the conference or editing the volume can't find it. You see what I'm saying? So, okay. I told you I had to stand up. So, here's what I want to say. Where are we? Where we are? What did they want? They wanted a major lecture course in our case, it was required to apply to the business school. A lot of our students wanted to go to the business school. So there are 300 people in this class. The faculty stopped that because it had not been approved by the faculty as a course for the 120 credits you need to graduate from that course. So we said until the faculty approves it, the college faculty approves it, people will not get credit for it. Well, you're not going to take courses you're not going to get credit for. And so that never came back to the college. The other thing was tenure track faculty. And our dean, God bless her, Michelle Gillespie, has said she will not use any of this money to hire tenure track faculty. Because in the agreement, the Koch Foundation can, on 30 days' notice, stop sending the money. It makes no sense to hire tenure track people if you have temporary money. So a number of things that I think the Kochs wanted at Wake Forest, they're not getting right now. But it's only because of the insistence of the faculty and some of our administrators that we exercise academic responsibility. So the lessons we learned is if you don't have Koch money now, you may have it soon. And so you can look on the Uncoach My Campus website and see who the networks are. When somebody comes to your campus, is hired in econ or business, usually that's where they're hired. You need to watch that. Secondly, you need to now take a look at the gift acceptance policies, the institutional gift acceptance policies, and grant acceptance policies, because that is what protects the academic responsibility and freedom of the university. So we encourage you to do that now. And so that's all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, we've had some very interesting and diverse perspectives brought forth. I'm not sure we've totally clarified where we are, but we would welcome your questions and comments. You may have your own experience that you'd like to share with us, and we'd love to hear it if you do. And we'd like to have your questions for our panelists to discuss.
I just wanted a clarification on the thing that we're supposed to check, the institutional giving policy.
Yeah, well,
Could you say more? How do you get there? Does every university have one?
oh, yes, they do. And what you would do is call the provost's office and ask for a copy of the gift acceptance policy. Generally, the gift acceptance committee is the president, the provost, the vice president for advancement, maybe the university council. That was who was on ours. But the AUP argues that if a grant or a gift touches on the areas of faculty primacy in shared governance, which are curriculum, faculty status, that is hiring and retention and promotion of faculty, and curriculum, that those gifts must come under the scrutiny of the faculty. And a lot of people don't know that and don't realize that, including our administrators.
Thank you.
Yes. Go ahead.
The effect of this on Duke. Can we just get basics
Well,
on?
we can tell you that we have had a faculty committee of not a formal faculty committee, but a number of faculty members have met with different administrators to talk about the issue of influence, etc. And we have been assured that the resources that have been applied to Duke from the Koch Foundation will not involve any intervention in the content of the classes. We have now 2 grants from Koch amounting to $5 million, one of which is supporting a tenure track faculty member who is going to be hired this year, with a search committee which is made up of regular rank faculty at Duke. And we have another program on the history of political economy, which is supported with another grant of $2.5 million, There are no further grants anticipated within our structure, within the arts and sciences school. Whether or not any other school wants to apply for that, we're not sure. And that our concern primarily is to make sure that we have control, the kind of control that Steve was just talking about, the kind of oversight. Obviously, every program that gets funded has a direction. I'm with the Center for Documentary Studies, and we've raised millions of dollars, but it's primarily for documentary work using oral histories and film and photography, and it's very clear what that's all about, and it's clearly administered in a way which does not focus on politics. So, that help? Does that help? Yes, ma'am. Yes, third row. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to say, I mean, I think the problem is already existing and beginning at Duke. We have heard about the PPE program, which is a joint program with UNC. I personally was contacted by the mother of a student who felt that the introductory course was actually propaganda for libertarianism, and shared the syllabus with me and showed me a book that's called, what was it, The Fake History of the Robber Barons or something, and it was produced by at the Ronald Reagan Ranch by Young Americans for Freedom, claiming to, rebuke all the historical scholarship on the Gilded Age. So the bottom line, I think, here is that we're in a moment of information gathering. And the reason we held this forum is that we're concerned that there was an existing presence, and now there's a multi-million-dollar presence coming in, and they're funding different things. But I do know, to the question here, that there was a course taught with Koch funding called Buchanan Camp, teaching people who were brought in about the ideas of James Buchanan, which have very much been weaponized by the Koch network and are being used to drive the kind of public policies that we heard about tonight. So I actually, and there might be some difference in the room about how we understand this, but I think there's quite significant issues here. And the thing that concerns me as a scholar and a researcher and a member of the Duke community is that we just don't know enough. But what we do know suggests that there's some real parallels with what's going on in other places that are getting this Koch funding, that is dark funding, that is often secret, that comes with strings, and that does push ideological programs. So I guess there's, I've heard visiting fellows in the HOPE program who complained about the ideological bent of the program that we just heard didn't have an ideological bent. So what I would like to encourage is for everybody in this room to get more information and start asking our Duke administration questions about why an institution that raised over $2 billion would be taking money from a source that has done what these speakers were talking about tonight in terms of resegregating our public schools, attacking public education, suppressing the vote, gerrymandering our state legislature, and all of these things. We are in a really serious situation here. It's a national situation, and I see the hand up of a representative here that we've invited from on Koch My Campus who has considerable experience with these Koch implants, so I will pass the mic to her.
Wait a second, Nancy. We have two other people to speak first, okay? Oh, I didn't know. Who had their hands up. So Samantha, you'll be the third person, okay? Down here. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Noah Lanier. I'm currently a sophomore undergraduate. Last semester, I took a course called Intro to Political Economy with Professor Michael Munger. In that class, we did read that myth of the robber barons. It was one of the chapters, and throughout the course, we were encouraged to think critically about the views that were presented, even though there was a lot of libertarian things presented there. We engaged in critical discussion. We talked about things that really didn't have any libertarian bend at all, like the ethics of voting and things like that. The purpose of having these conversations and to have the sides that may make us uncomfortable is to allow us to think critically about the issues that we hold, or the beliefs that we hold. And if that information isn't introduced into the classrooms and encouraged to think in a critical way, if we just say, no, let's only consider one side, I believe we're robbing students of education. That class was an amazing class, and I do not regret taking it at all.
I would like to hear from you know, the person who's from Uncoke, my campus, actually, she has the most experience in understanding why there's this big push of money. There was a chart up there earlier that showed in 2006 there was only several $1 million that the Koch funded and allied organizations were funding in education, and then went up to $240 million. I respect. So I would like to hear, you know, to find out what, because I'm hearing more and more about George Mason, other universities that, you know, are not, as the gentleman just spoke, you know, weighing one side or the other, you know, and that's the argument, by the way, that we hear from science or climate denial people, that we need to have both sides of the argument. And so, you know, we need to be aware of how that's, you know, how that's used. But I would like to hear, you know, from the person from Uncoke My Camp.
Right now, Samantha is a co-founder of Koch Uncoke My Campus.
Hi everyone, I hope you can understand me. I'm losing my voice. I had an event earlier this week. But thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad y'all had this event tonight. Just a little bit about my background. I'm actually a graduate of George Mason University, which is the Koch Foundation's favorite university. We've received over $130 million from the Koch Foundation since 2005. I came to this work because I actually had a quite different experience. When I was a freshman, there was a environmental economics class being taught by a Koch-funded professor at George Mason University, where the textbook that was used was titled Global Warming and Other Eco-Myths. And the professor quite literally told the students that if we wanted to debate climate change, we could get out of the classroom and not come back. So I had a very different experience at George Mason than what I'm hearing tonight. I really want to just go back and really thank the organizers of this event, because what I find this event to be very powerful about is the fact that through my investigation of what was going on at my own alma mater as a student and now as an employee of Uncoke My Campus, is that the Koch Foundation uses universities in two ways. They've honestly very clearly stated that they use academia to pump out research because they want to mainstream the ideas that support their policy agenda, the policies that we heard about from the panelists this afternoon. And secondly, they want to gain access to particularly undergraduate students because they view those students as their future voters. I've seen funding proposals to the Koch Foundation and from the Koch Foundation where they quite literally quantify how many undergraduate students they're able to get in front of, like how many professors they have and how many undergraduate students they're teaching, and they define that as their grassroots numbers. So I really do think it's important to connect the impact that the Koch Foundation wants to have within the university system to all of the discussions that the panelists had tonight about the overall impact that it's having on our democracy. I also want to revert back to the point about the Koch's not donating to, preach a certain ideological agenda. Charles Koch himself, I can send you the speech. He's made a speech where he clearly states himself that he's not going to fund a department or center that doesn't benefit his corporate bottom line or his free market ideological agenda. And so I really do want to reiterate that from my personal perspective and my personal experiences, even if you're not experiencing what I experienced yet here, I really do think it's important that folks are informed and folks are looking out for the best interest of Duke, of Duke's students, and of Duke's reputation. Thank you.
Thank you. Tomas, I'll get you in a second. Tomas, go ahead.
So a couple of things I wanted to add to the conversation, because first is to complicate the Koch narrative as to voting rights issues in particular, and to mention, I think it's an important part of the record, that one of the things that the Koch network has been doing in recent years has been very forward on supporting versions of criminal justice reform. And particularly at the intersection of criminal justice reform and voting rights, the network was supportive of Amendment 4 in Florida last year, which was the felony reenfranchisement amendment that gave 1.5 million people with past criminal convictions the right to vote and ended lifetime disenfranchisement in that state. I think that I think there is sort of an evolving picture here, and one that deserves some examination. Second thing is there are one piece of this, I think, at least from my perspective and from my organization's perspective, thinking about democracy and the way rules work and the way systems work, and that the thing that I'm seeing in this conversation is that there's not a clarity about what the rules are, and that there are some real issues that people are raising around transparency. And that, when we go back to the issue of what makes an equitable society, what makes an equitable institution, one of the fundamental things is that people know what the rules are. And one of the things that's happening here is that we don't know what the rules are, and whether it is as simple as what the institution's rules on giving are, or what strings are not being included on the part of the Koch Foundation. And I think that one route to some potential, to sort of answering the question that's on the screen, is there a conflict, is shedding some light on again, what exactly are the terms of the whole engagement.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. My name is Sam Willen. So back in around 2009 or so, the Koch Foundation funded a guy named Richard Muller of Berkeley, who was a Berkeley physicist and a MacArthur Fellow, and at that time he was a pretty prominent climate change denier, or a skeptic, really. So I don't know if denier is quite the right word. But anyway, they funded him to do research to either prove or disprove the whole hypothesis. And they gave him a large amount of money and an unlimited number of years. And 3 years later, in around 2012 or 13, he came out with his report. He said he had changed his mind, and now he believed that climate change was indeed happening, and that humans were a prominent part of that. The Koch brothers had said that they would do whatever he said, that they would follow his lead. And when he came out with his report, they kind of waffled and said, oh, that's very interesting, blah, blah, blah. But as far as I know, they still are denying, and they're still funding places like the Heartland Institute. When they do things like that, that seems to me to just automatically create a conflict in universities. They should just be dismissed. They should not be granted any credibility whatsoever. And this is really prominent. You can check it out. Google it. Richard Muller, no relation to Robert. He doesn't even spell his name the same. I think it's Muller. Berkeley. It's just been thrown aside. So when people do things like that, just forget them.
So I just wanted to ask a question on that particular point. An open question for the panel, and hopefully the lady here from Uncook My Campus can also help. Do we draw a distinction between two different scenarios? One where a faculty member has a particular ideological bent and is looking for funding, and that turns out to be a match made in heaven, or like the second scenario where a university accepts a grant from a foundation and then either doctors or edits or like straight up withholds the academic output of its faculty members, because I think those two are very different scenarios, and I would just like to know if there's a distinction being drawn between the two.
One thing that we've seen, including at Duke, where the the Koch connections of faculty were exposed, in some cases by Greenpeace researchers on Koch My Campus and others who raised concern, some of the faculty members began scrubbing their websites of the connections, or at least there was a correlation, perhaps not causation. We don't have the proof of the causation, but the information disappeared. And so I think this is another place, and I think it's right that Tomas said we need to have more information, but we need to have community members as well as faculty and students asking the questions. For example, we have an annual conflict of interest policy at Duke that I think faculty everywhere have to sign. But what if you're getting funding from the Charles Koch Foundation, pumping out the kind of thing that Koch hires faculty to do, and your research reports and the things that you're publishing do not indicate that you are getting this money? And I think, to the gentleman's point over here, I like the example that you raised. I think it's important and instructive, but we should also be aware that the Koch Foundation and the Koch network of organizations are among the largest funders of climate science denial in the world right now. A Greenpeace researcher went to a transnational, 5 continents, and put up their Atlas network. This is part of a transnational group that the Koch network is part of. You can see the map, if you go on, you look up Atlas network. And all he did is say, we want to see what the Koch network is up to in your country. And people came from 5 continents. And he just said, pull out your computers, look at this map, report back to us in 20 minutes. He said there was pandemonium in the room because people from all these different countries, from 5 different continents, said, oh my God, those are the people pushing climate science denial in our country. Oh my God, those are the people trying to eliminate our environmental protections. And oh my God, those are the faculty members who work with those centers to push out that climate science denial. So I am really glad that you raised this. Sorry, I didn't catch your name. But I think, for a university, this is perhaps the most critical question, right? That there is absolutely a scientific consensus in the world right now that climate change is human-made. We have about a 10-year window to act on this, and we have a network of organized money based in the fossil fuel sector that is trying to blow smoke in the public eye, right? That is trying deliberately to mislead and misinform the public about the science so that they think they don't need to act. That is the refugee crisis, the flooding, the fires, all of these things that are worsened by climate change. I personally put that at the feet of the Koch Institute, the Koch Foundation, and frankly, the faculty who work with them, who support and don't speak out against that climate science denial when we have this 10-year window that is going to devastate. The UN says there'll be 150 million climate refugees by 2050. This is the seriousness of the stakes of what we're talking about here. And I think there has to be almost a public health understanding that when faculty make that commitment to work with the Koch Institute, unless they speak out against the voter suppression, the attacks on abortion rights, the weaponization of homophobia, all the kinds of things that have come up here tonight, I have to say I don't see the academic integrity.
Yes, sir. Right here.
2 items. The first sticks in my craw as a sort of obvious red line or red herring, and it is that Duke and UNC have received substantial Koch funding around, in fact, their philosophy, politics, economics programs, and particularly Duke cannot see fit to approve light rail stations between Duke and UNC. It seems very suspicious. I don't know if anybody would like to address that. If not, I have a second question. I do want to mention the work of John Komlos in advanced economic ideas such as non-equilibrium, asymmetry of information, and how that plays into some of the overcarriages of standard equilibrium models of economics. My opinion. But anyway, the light rail issue seems, especially since the Koch network is also opposing light rail here and nationwide anyway.
How aware are the students and faculty at the university of the Koch brothers' influence and the amount of money that's given to the campus? I mean, if people perhaps, if the faculty took it upon themselves or the university took it upon themselves to broadcast this, or is it something they don't want people to know?
I actually think that's not, the university is public about funding we've received, and it's for a very specific program, and I don't think the university is guilty of misrepresenting this relationship.
I'm not saying misrepresenting, but how well aware are the people, the faculty and the students, aware of the input from the Koch brothers?
Alex is in the program, so go ahead.
As a part of your group, which is the recipient of at least half of the money that Bill mentioned, we knew perfectly well what the source is and discussed at considerable length the issue of whether there were dirty hands problems associated with taking money from the Koch brothers for enterprises which not only have nothing to do with their ideological agenda but are inimical to it.
Yeah, so just to address how well the campus knows about the sort of proliferation of the Koch money, he's in my year, the son of David Sr.'s in our year. So I think that could be definitely a function of why the sort of attention has been diverted to Duke. But just sort of my question was that we've heard a lot about the Koch brothers. Like, are there any good guys who are donating to Duke? Like, why isn't, like, can we hear of, who's giving for the other side? Like, are there individuals like the Koch brothers on the opposite end of the spectrum who are trying to stop what the panel's discussed? It seems like if we don't do it, like if you don't fight fire with fire almost, well, where can you get? Because their influence doesn't seem to be stopping.
Well, the first point I would make is that I'm not sure we have evidence that existing programs are in fact nefarious in what they're promoting. The first point. There are controls over those programs, and there is supervision by the deans. Now, I certainly understand what you're saying and the importance of making sure that no money will be sought that is not regulated and controlled by the academic structure. There clearly are gifts given for very aggressive research on grassroots activism, which some would say that's giving to a different cause. It's not, from our point of view, as long as it's done well, done correctly. So I do think we have in place some fairly effective mechanisms for control. But I also think we have to be very aware of the danger of not having those things.
Yeah, I was just wondering about just kind of the depth of this reach of the Koch network, like how far it really gets in there, because even if everyone at Duke is aware of how this happens, that doesn't mean, that reduces the level of impact it has. So even if Duke has zero funding from them, right? But Duke students do a study abroad program with universities that are funded with them, or Duke gets a book from a library that's paid for by the Koch brothers in a different university. You can't, it's so connected among the university systems and all of higher education really that you can't actually ever detach yourself, even if you are well aware of how much impact they have, right? But I was also gonna say that everyone at Duke, I'm a student, I'm a senior, everyone here is aware of how Duke is completely embedded in Wall Street, and then embedded in all of these industries like oil or these guys, and then the military industrial complex. We can go so far in that because I've literally been here with American Grand Strategy and all the things that they hold. So that's another conversation. But anyway, it's just it's not just the Koch brothers. It's generally the influence of big money on a campus. But you can get donations from people, for anonymous reasons. People donate anonymously to financial aid all the time, but then that's money that the school can use without strings attached. So it's with them, I think there's we can't really say good guys versus bad guys, but we can say that I don't know, that just because we're aware of them donating to us doesn't necessarily mean we're not, complicit in some way. Just by virtue of being here. So, yeah, I know.
Kate, Corey, and then Samantha. You got a mic.
Okay. To the gentleman who was asking the question about are there any parallel organizations doing good work? I just want to mention the State Innovation Exchange, which is a progressive liberal counterpart to ALEC. And American Legislative Exchange Council. If you've read Nancy's book, you know all about ALEC. This is a group that provides model legislation for various states to advance the ideology. I'll just say. So it's called SIX, S-I-X is the abbreviation, State Innovative Exchange. And it's a progressive group, and from North, they have a reproductive freedom group. They have councils on every topic you can think of. But in the area of reproductive rights, I'll just tell you that some of your representatives here in Durham, Floyd McKissick, Marcia Morey, Greg Meyer, Mike Woodward, are all members of that, founding members of that. And I think they're now up to, so there were 18 founding members in North Carolina of the reproductive rights group. And I think the total group now is somewhere in the high 30s.
Yeah, I'll just, I wanted to respond to the last two questions and comments. The one on, are there programs being funded that are on the other side or different than this perspective? I will say that there's obviously other programs that are being funded, but the Koch Foundation representatives have been on record bragging about the fact that there is no other donor or donor network that has the infrastructure that they have set up that really focuses on leveraging academia and then using those products with their think tanks and Americans for Prosperity and then the legislatures. So while there are definitely other programs that are funded that might counter a lot of what Koch is trying to do, Koch himself or the Koch Foundation themselves really do brag about being the best and having the most integrated and largest infrastructure. And they do view every university that they fund as complicit in that agenda and that infrastructure. And then on the note of, even if we are really aware of what Duke's relationship is or any other relationship or what it looks like nationwide, I just wanted to give some statistics. The Koch Foundation has funded over 400 universities across the country and given over $230 million, I think is the most recent data since 2005 to those universities. And I do think you make a really great point. I noticed recently that Duke has some visiting folks from the Institute for Humane Studies coming. I think it was Duke, or at least it was one UNC school, coming in March to recruit for internships. The Institute for Humane Studies is at George Mason University, but they send recruiters around to other campuses. So I think your point is really good. You don't even have to have Koch money or a lot of Koch money to have recruiters and programs that are funded by the Koch Foundation coming to your campus. I came to this work as a graduate of GMU, so my interest was rooted in the Koch network, but as doing this work professionally, we realized that, honestly, if any donor is smart, they would kind of follow Koch's lead and try to buy as much influence as possible and get as much bang for their buck as well. So on Koch My Campus, we spent the last year consulting with the American Association of University Professors, a lot of other higher education policy experts, and just last month we released a model university policy report that literally outlines best practices for gift acceptance at a university, as well as the oversight of donor-sponsored centers. So if you're interested in really talking about that topic of what are the rules and where do we draw these lines about what is acceptable and what's not, we've kind of done that homework for you, and that report is on our website.
Yeah, I was invited to come talk on the Koch network and academic integrity tonight. And I'm very concerned about that, but I'm also concerned about all the other corporations and institutions that you've been talking about. So I don't want to give a mistaken impression that it's only the Kochs who want influence on campus. It is not. And we are very clear in our Senate and our AAUP that we're not focused on just the Charles G. Koch Foundation. But I've had somebody in advancement tell me, Steve, everybody who gives money to the university wants something. Of course, my response to him is, well, they can't have everything they want. I don't care who they are, and that's why there has to be a relationship between the faculty or among the faculty, the administration, and the trustees. We each have our special areas of expertise, and we need to collaborate in that. and we get the self-governance we deserve. That's what I tell people on campus. We get the self-governance we deserve. We get the democracy we deserve. We get the capitalism we deserve. We don't object to it. We're going to get it.
Go ahead, sir.
I understand that it's not always practical to not accept donor money. It is a significant source of funds for the operation of the university. But my question is, if we do not intend to outfund or outdonate the Koch brothers, are there other ways do we have examples of cases where other methods have been used to combat foreign influence on campuses successfully? Like other sorts of student movements or self-governance movements that we can learn from?
Basically, I think that university administration does have rules in effect which control the degree to which an outside donor can shape a program that is established. And that, for the most part, that works pretty well. Yes, ma'am.
I've lived here for 15 years. I have my doctorate from Washington University in St. Louis. And I was just back there after not having been there in about 20 years. And the campus has changed enormously. And one of the ways it's changed is when I was there, my doctorate's in English, you know, the humanities, English, history, you know, languages were very strong there. And those departments are teeny tiny now, and all the new departments, and because of all the money, all the funders, all that money is going into science programs and engineering programs and biotechnology, all those kinds of things, which are great. I don't think they're bad programs, but we used to think that a liberal arts education and learning about you know, how to think critically and teaching young people how to think critically was really important. And I'm afraid that all the money that's pouring into universities, just like all the money that's pouring into politics, is misshaping the universities and really changing their role in society. And that's a concern that I think, that balance that people need to think about.
Well, I think the National Endowment for the Humanities has had no increase in its budget in the last decade.
There you go.
The National Science Foundation has had a significant increase. Let's go here first, and then Kate and Steve.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Kleinman, and I taught at UNC-Chapel Hill for 37 years. And so I've seen a lot of battles as far as I know we're talking mostly about the Kochs, but in early 2000s, for example, Art Pope wanted to, I'll just use my own language, buy a program in so-called Western civilization. And he ended up not doing that. There was a lot of pushback and so on. What I want to do is reiterate one of Nancy's points, which is that it's not only a matter of whether a faculty member or a director of a program is having all this obvious oversight by the Kochs or the Popes, like it rhymes, so I made it plural. But it's also a matter of, although I've had this argument with some of my otherwise progressive colleagues, which is that who is one willing to take money from? You know, it's not that long ago that the medical school at UNC-Chapel Hill took money from the tobacco industry. And as far as I know, they don't do that any longer. And I think, again, what all of you have talked about on the panel, if we look at what the Kochs are funding, what the agenda is, even if they are willing to fund, you know, a couple of faculty positions or whatever where it doesn't look like it's the, you know, exactly their usual agenda. In fact, I think it'd be really smart to do that, because then it looks like that's not so bad. Like, you know, you have the good credentials and you're teaching whatever you're teaching. I mean, it seems to me that if, you know, they asked me to be a consultant, I would tell them that. I'd say, look, you know, make sure there's a few liberals around, right? Maybe not, you know, real radical analysts, but at least some, you know, liberals. So I'm just saying that I think that we have to think about who are we willing to take money from as individual faculty members or as heads of programs. And I know that their faculty have said to me, well, look, when I get the money, I'm going to do something really good with it. And I said, well, who would you not take money from? And I don't want to, sound too inflammatory, but I'm going to go there anyway. It's like if it was the KKK, I think they wouldn't take the money. It's sort of a matter of where do you draw the line? And I think everything that we've learned about what the Kochs are really interested in, whether they have a few liberals around or not, and the same with Art Pope, I would never have taken the money. I mean, if Art Pope had given the money for first-year seminars, etc., I would not have taken the money, even if I would have been allowed to do what I wanted to do. So it's not only whether faculty control the money, which of course is crucial, and control the process, but I think that, those who take the money, which Nancy was pointing out, it's like, well, where is the academic integrity? Thank you.
Kate.
Yeah, 2 quick items. Just bear in mind that when Governor McCrory was elected in 2012, he appointed Art Pope as his budget chief. So the responsibility there for all sorts of nefarious financial shifting of money is easily traced. In the spirit of transparency, I'd like to ask on Koch My Campus, who funds you?
A lot of my labor and salary to produce that was funded by the American Association of University Professors. We've been funded by American Federation of Teachers, and so a lot of different folks who are already in the university world partner with us and donate to us. And then the reality is that actually a year ago, right when I came on staff, we lost those big donations for a little while, and we were, for a really long time, funded by grassroots donors. So we would have faculty make $1,000 donations, or even students make $5 donations. So it's a mix of our large education partners and our grassroots folks just like y'all.
Any advocacy organizations support you?
What do you mean, advocacy organizations? Like what partners do we have?
Yeah.
So those same folks, American Association of University Professors, for a while, Greenpeace did fund us quite largely. We don't get funding from them anymore, but they're a big partner of ours. The American Federation of Teachers, SCIU, so lots of labor and education organizations.
I just wanted to say one more thing. To your question, which is a very good question, I'm not sure I understood the second option you gave, but the first thing you said is if somebody happens to find, if a scholar happens to find a funder who thinks their research is the bomb and is very congenial, what's wrong with that? My response, nothing at all is wrong with that. What I'm concerned about is if a foundation like this sends a professor onto campus, which seems to have happened on our campus, and then funds them to the tune of $4 million and has designs to hire tenure-track people. If you hire tenure-track people, if I'm that tenure-track person that gets hired and they can withdraw the money within 30 days, then the research I'm doing, I don't think I have academic freedom. I don't think I can just follow my research where it goes and just ignore who the funder is and who the director is. You see what I'm saying? That's putting your thumb on the scale in a way that has no academic integrity. And that's what we're concerned about.
Are there other questions for anybody in the panel?
So I completely agree with you, and I also completely agree with the fact that in case there is science or there's research being done, for example, climate change denial or climate change skepticism research being done, that's being funded by the Koch network, that should raise a lot of eyebrows, because that's something that there's not subjective opinion on, that's pretty objective. We're like consciously doing irreversible damage to our planet. That's fact. If, on the other hand, there's an and this was the second part of my question from earlier. If, on the other hand, there is an institution, like we've established that Duke has received Koch money, right? Yet we are sitting at an event that's bashing Koch money and that is very critical of Koch money. So we can say that like it's not like everything that happens on a university campus has to be sanctioned by the people who have provided a huge donation, right? That's where that's the heart of my question. If it's not an institutional problem, if it's just a personal one, where a person has an academic or ideological bent and would like to pursue funding to fund that research, we just don't have any right to stop that, at least in the world that I see. And if there is any way around that, then I would like to hear that.
In relation to this last point, I would like to second what the UNC professor said before, that the lines are not as clear cut. You know, the fact that the source where the money comes from has to be considered. You can't just parse it and say, this is, you know, clearly ideologically directed research, and this is not, and therefore, in the case that it's not, it's okay to get the money. I think the source and ideological pressure on a large scale has to be considered in terms of academic integrity, because that's what integrity means. If you take that and, you know, parse it and say, I can take 25 cents because these are good and the rest I can't, then it doesn't make any sense anymore.
I think that it's good for us to have a conversation now with our individual panelists if we wish to. And I want to thank you all for being so attentive and so engaged by this issue. And we thank you for being here tonight.